Thank you so much for the invite. I'm honored.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Okay. First of all, a couple clerical issues. I have to change it again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see, where is he? Stuart Burke had, I guess, fusion surgery on his neck this week. And they somehow managed to pierce his esophagus, which is now infected. So he can't talk right now. And he won't be with us today. So the topic, we had 4 topics here that he wanted to know if anyone had neck fusion surgery and how it affected their practice of jujitsu upon recovery. And so we're going to leave that topic for when he can return and be a participant. But if any of you know of anyone in your dojo who's had any type of fusion surgery or joint replacements, things of that sort, and how they've adapted, it might be make it worthwhile. Anyway, so we're left with 3 other topics. You have a list of the topics, and we get through these, we can hit anything else that comes up. The only thing I want to say before we get into the first one, which is the force continuum, appropriate use. Does everybody know what the force continuum or appropriate use of force is with effect to law enforcement agencies? Does everyone know what it is? Okay.
I think so. I think so.
Okay, let me preface this that anything we say in this discussion, if there's anybody who is law enforcement, they should obviously refer to their own law enforcement agency for their use of force continuum. Hopefully they have one. And okay, what a use of force, because I've dealt with law enforcement agencies, and there have been a couple agencies in the past that have asked me to set up programs for them. And my first question is, do you have a use of force continuum? And when their answer is no, my response is, once you get one, get back to me. Okay. What a use of force of continuum is a written policy that says at what point an officer may go from one level of force to another, or go from simple restraining moves to use of a baton, to use of what's the spray?
Pepper spray, mace.
Pepper spray, to use of the electrical shock, to deadly force. Okay, and most large law enforcement agencies have that. Okay, I'm dealing with one agency now that doesn't have one, but they're in the process of getting one, and the older officers are opposed to it, and the newer ones want it. So it's kind of like police can't be in the Wild West any longer. When I was working with the LAPD for about 7 years, the first thing we did after the Rodney King incident, and we looked at their first thing we did was look at their use of force policy, and we changed. They went from restraining techniques to use of baton, and then pepper spray, and we switched the pepper spray and baton. But in any case, if you deal with an agency, or they want you to train them, that's the first thing you want to make sure they have, because that protects the city, that protects the officer, and if you follow it, it protects you. Okay, and that's it's kind of like the big CYA. So that's what it is. Different agencies have different they have different variations of it. And as long as you know what it is, then you can, if you're going to train police officers in a formal environment, then you know what you can do. Okay. Okay, so and it says, how does it relate to choosing submissions to conclude a technique? Okay, this is the hard part, because in jiu-jitsu, and anyone can enter in here, I just want to set some, in jiu-jitsu, my understanding is a submission is really only a courtesy move we do on the mat. On the street, there's no such thing as a submission. You dislocate the person's elbow, their shoulder, you break their wrist, whatever happens, happens, okay? Because you're not going to choose a submission at that point on the street, because it's going to be automatic. Whatever you have practiced, that's what you're going to do, okay? And we all, we all practice going through a series of techniques, as Darren has done, I think a couple sessions ago, we're just one technique through the technique flow, and you end up with a submission, and it's over. So I don't know whether there's, do you choose a technique when you're submitting a person? I mean, in class, I know you may, but if you're doing, if you're out on the street, would you be choosing a submission?
That's what
This came from Thomas. That's why
that's what precipitated my question. Part of it, Professor Kirby, is my evolution as an artist over the decades. Is I learned jujitsu. I entered into jujitsu before I entered into purely striking arts, Taekwondo, Krav Maga, and I've noticed that 20-year-old TJ versus early 50s TJ early TJ was much more likely to look for some kind of finesse. I'm at the point now where I'm going to stomp or palm heel and get up and get gone. And I've noticed that that's come over into my training, and my students tend to see much more combative applications now. And I'm wondering, is a part of it, okay, so I hate getting on the ground. If I'm going to get up, and if I don't have to go there, I'm not going to kneel with you if I can just stomp your throat. And I don't mean to be crass when I'm saying it this way, but this is where the Force Continuum, and having worked with several law enforcement officers, SWAT officers in particular, as my students, I've noticed that in very few instances do they appreciate what would finish out a technique in a test, maybe a wrist lock or an arm bar. What they would say is, if it's gone to this level, you've probably already come to the place where deadly force may be appropriate, and if you did a skull crushing stomp. So that's why I was very curious to hear your thoughts on it from all your years of experience.
My number one rule with my students is, on the street, you never go down to the ground. There are a lot of nice judo pins, etc., yada yada, and those judo pins can be deadly on the street, because what do you do after you have the person in a chokehold? I mean, you're waiting for them to tap out. I mean, and so I say, if you're going to go down, you have to have them in some sort of a control hold when you are going down. That's number one. And number two, I know from I've changed my training from it probably changed in the 90s. If I take a person down, I will. Can you hear me still?
Yes.
Okay. Let me change my, because these ear pods are telling me all sorts of stuff, and it's okay. Well, let's keep it on for the meantime. I will do what I can to get the other person onto their stomach, so their back is towards me, because then I know I'm relatively safe. And that's where most law enforcement people want their suspect or perpetrator anyway, is, face down, because then it's easier to control them and cuff them and whatnot. But I'm not saying that arm bars are effective and wrist block presses are effective, and even a sternum press is effective. But you don't want to get down into a wrestling, what I would call a wrestling situation, or my instructor Seki would say, if we went down in, because this gets into one of the other topics about Randori, if we went down to the ground with our opponent doing Randori and we didn't have him submitted in 10 seconds, Seki would refer to it as chicken scratching and break us up and have us start all over. Because he said, you cannot spend that much time on the ground chicken scratching. You've got to finish this person off. And so I don't know. I understand where there may be times where you may change a submission hold or change a lock or transition to something else, which is the value of practicing one submission after another at times, in case, because things do screw up. I used to have a student who was really double jointed, and doing submissions on him of any kind was an almost impossible effort. You want to know about fine, his arm bends the other way. So what? Now what are you going to do? And yes, Darren.
Yeah, Sensei, I find that in both scenarios, if you're moving from one technique to another and using it as a restraint in a real life scenario, first of all, I do the same thing. I try to stay off the floor at all costs, especially when I'm working with law enforcement officials. And then two, also make them consciously aware that if they do go to the floor, that not only are they having to defend themselves, but they also need to protect their weapons as well from being used against them.
Right.
But then also I have found that in transition of one technique to the next, regardless of the force, let's say I'm using one technique as a restraint, I still only have a very short period of time that if I'm using it as a restraint and not quote unquote using it as a finish, whether I'm breaking, dislocating, or whatever, then eventually within 3 to 4 seconds, that restraint hold becomes numb to them and they can attack again. So you have to move on.
Right.
But in the same sense, the same scenario, if I use it as a break, it's not like an uke that understands how to fall out of the technique. They're still standing right in front of you and the threat is still right there. So you have to be able to transition again into another something to be able to restrain and keep yourself in a safe position.
Okay. Yeah.
Excuse me, how much of this is speaking from experience? Because I am under the impression that in street situations, a single broken arm will end the fight.
I feel pretty confident that I've had, unfortunately, the first-hand experience in a real-life scenario. And even with a broken limb, wrist, finger, arm, dislocated elbow, or even a shoulder at times, yeah, it's painful, but it's not painful immediately. It's painful after about 15 seconds when they finally realize it and the adrenaline starts to kind of wear off a little bit. So yeah, the attack and the threat is still there.
I will usually, okay, I've had several students who've used jiu-jitsu on the street. They have never had to go down to the ground with their opponent because their opponent sustained an injury either from the throw, takedown, or impact with the ground. So I've never had a student who's had to do that. But one thing I do tell my students is that if you do dislocate, fracture, cause a serious injury, is you need to move away from that person as quickly as possible, because they're going to have a ton of adrenaline flowing, and as you said, for a while they're not going to feel the pain. Their prime concern at that point is to get away from you and prevent themselves from being injured, and that goes back to the use of force continuum. And I think I've mentioned this before.
And Sensei, I would also agree that throws certainly terminate the scenario in most case scenarios, and especially if you're able to use the restraint properly and being able to choke someone to unconsciousness, and then you can have them into a more secure position. But both of those extremely effective. But as far as locks or joint locks, or even breaks sometimes, not necessarily the case when they're standing up in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what you do during the throw is obviously going to affect what happens once they're on the ground or wherever they end up. With most people, at least in dealing with law enforcement, their intent is to get away from the police officer. And the police officer's intent is to legally restrain them. And that's why it creates the illusion that the law enforcement officer is the aggressor, which he is, but he's the lawful aggressor as long as he works within the use of force continuum. And that's hard for some people to recognize. You know, it's kind of like it's two different perspectives of what's going on. As far as I don't know, I lost the second part of it. As far as, you know, that I mean, I've used this. Fortunately, I've never injured a person. I've been to court once, done 2 depositions. And I kind of facetiously say that the key to not getting in trouble is leave no marks. If you as a martial artist end up being in court, you have to be able to explain yourself. You have to explain what you did, how it works. And that's why jiu-jitsu instructors tend to be different from other sensei. And sometimes we explain things to death to our students because we want them to understand. But that knowledge is, if you find yourself in a legal situation, that knowledge is so critical to your maintaining your position that you were acted with reasonable force or whatever you want to call it. You have to be able to explain yourself. I think, as Darren said, once you break something on a person or dislocate them, they're still going to be dangerous for a while until that either that pain sets in, or they go into shock, or something else happens. But you, as I said before, you need to get away from that person because then they are really dangerous. Because they've got one pain, they may not feel any of the pain that you give to them, particularly if they're going into shock.
And Sensei, that's also not even taken into the also threat that they may be under the influence of something too, which
Yes.
would also be even more aggressive.
Right. That and I've had to deal with a couple of people, students on drugs, and it really is difficult to control them. Usually, what I tell my students, because I've in working for law enforcement agency, there is a video out there of one guy that's high on PCP, and he was shot in the buck naked, shot in the torso several times, and he's still coming towards the police officers, and he finally bled out. But the point is, the sad part is that if you have an attacker who is high on drugs, I tell my students, it doesn't matter what you know, it isn't going to work. Find a 2x4, find a baseball bat, break a leg, one of his legs. He isn't going to feel it, but he can't come after you as fast. I mean, that's a cold thing to say, but if a person doesn't feel pain, as Darren mentioned, if the person doesn't feel pain, what do?
Choke them.
Pardon?
Choke them.
If you can get them to do it, yeah.
Yeah.
But then I mean, if you're in law enforcement, you now run into a lot of problems with with a choke. And if he's lucky and you're doing a choke from behind, he can still throw you. And then I don't I mean, yeah, if you can cut off his, more important than choking it is cutting off his blood supply to his brain, would be more effective, because that's going to put him out.
Mhm.
Sensei,
Yes, sir.
one of the more fascinating classes we had was one of our Saturday morning classes years ago, when the brother of one of our students was a special agent FBI stationed in Jackson, Mississippi. And he came to our class to demonstrate law enforcement restraints. It was fascinating because you hear that the difference between sanctioned fighting in the street is rules.
Yes.
Okay. What was fascinating is when we discussed or demonstrated Budoshin Jujitsu submissions, or traditional Japanese submissions, and compared that to what he is required to use to restrain perpetrators. Fascinating to see the differences, because he had a lot of rules he had to operate under, and he made it real clear why they did what they did, how they did what they did, and his demonstrations were fascinating. I want to think we videotaped that class, but what a fascinating experience it was to realize how constrained law enforcement is.
Yes.
And how tight those rules are compared to what someone on the street defending themselves. The only rules we have are rules established by governments. And some of those are common sense rules too. But what a fascinating class that was, and everybody had a major aha moment time and again when they saw the difference between what they've learned and what law enforcement has to do.
Right.
Great respect for what law enforcement has to deal with.
Yes. I mean, they are, if they have a good training program, and most most law enforcement agencies in the U.S. do not have a continuous arrest and control training program for their officers. It's not as effective, it's effective as it should be, but they do have a lot of rules they have to follow. If there was a show on TV last night, Station 19, and I rarely watch these things because they're, it's the same plot over and over again. But the program that was on last night was really good because it involved some guy who had kidnapped 2 kids, and they started a fire in order to draw attention, even though he said they weren't there, and the police were there already. But the mother was outside because she had a tracking device on her daughter's phone and found where her daughter was. And I guess there were some off-duty fire persons that were there, but they couldn't break in because they didn't have a reason to break into the house because it didn't involve public safety. And the police came, and they were basically saying to this mother that, you know, you have no reason for us to be here. And besides, the guy in the house is the one that called the police because he was tired of your harassment outside. And I mean, ultimately, she became very physical. She was arrested. One of the firemen was arrested because, you know, he tried to defend the mother physically. But it was amazing at how close to the book everyone followed what legally should be done. I mean, that amazed me in the program. And the restraints that everyone had to operate under, even the police officers. So it's, you know, it's yeah, as you said, David, they do operate under a lot of restraints, and there are things they cannot do. And if you're going to if you're going to teach police officers, you have to find out what can you do, and then you have to teach your techniques within that range. That's why it's, who was I speaking to? I think this past week, someone, I said, you basically, this law enforcement agency down in Texas. I said, forget the judo throws for police officers. You're dealing basically with controlling their extremities, because if you control their extremities, then you can control their torso. But, you know, whether you do that joint locks or roll, you know, arm roll or whatever you want to call it, that's what you're limited to. I've seen, there was a news clip this week on some police officers. They were dressed up as, it was hilarious. They were dressed up as Santa Claus and his dwarfs, and they were in Walmart. Oh, I think it was a Walmart, to go after shoplifters. And they happened to notice a robbery going on outside. And so you have one of the dwarfs trying to get control of this robber, and Santa Claus comes up from behind and tackles him, you know, and takes him down. I mean, they did, you know, arrest the guy, but the procedures were all wrong. I mean, you don't, trying to tackle a person, take them down is going to risk, you know, injury and other problems, and doesn't always work. I've seen, if you ever follow in, I don't know, in LA, they televise car chases now. It's better than anything else that's on TV, but they, you know, and they may go on for an hour or two. And there are in some cases where there's a procedure that we actually came up with back in about '96 for how do you deal with a person who's physically aggressive, and you have it's called a 4-man takedown. And you have one officer in front and 4 officers behind. And each officer is supposed to get an extremity, and they just lift the person up, put him face down, and cuff him. And it's so nice and clean, and no one gets hurt. And I've seen that done 2 or 3 times, which, you know, I said, yay, you know, something we got out there. But yeah, they are under a lot of restrictions. Unfortunately, you know, I don't want to say unfortunately, but they are under a lot of restrictions. And we have to realize, as instructors, if you ever get in a court of law, because you're an instructor, or a black belt, you're supposed to have more control over what you're doing. And so you may be held up to the same standard as law enforcement. And that's just something to be aware of. You know, your students could probably get away with more than you could, because they're just students, you know. But you're supposed to have more control because you're a teacher. But anyway, so that's I don't really think you can choose a submission to conclude a technique. I think what you do, you do. And I think the situation, as Darren inferred, I think the situation dictates what you do. Okay. And that's, you know, if you've had good training, you have several options of what you can do. But, you know, then get into the concept of Mushin and all that, you know, the esoteric stuff. And my feeling is you don't decide what submission you're going to do. It's just, you do whatever you do. And hopefully you do the right thing. So, okay. Thomas came up with another great question. Just a second. I have a dog that she only comes to me when she has to go outside. She's old, she's senile, she's deaf. Just a second.
Something tells me this segment might get edited out.
My wife is letting her out. And if we don't pay attention to her, she leaves us something. Anyway. Okay. Thomas's other question is, what is an example of a technique that can be executed only one way? Thomas, you gave me a lot of work this week. Okay. I went through the student black belt handbook, couldn't find a technique that can be only done one way. I went to the Budoshin Jujitsu, which is a PDF. The PDF file, unfortunately, has a search function. I looked up under one way, specifically, only one way, anything that would limit a technique. I couldn't find anything. And that's only within the Budoshin system. You know, I know I may say this is the only way I know how to do this, and you may come up and say, oh, there's a different way of doing it. So I don't think I know there are techniques that can only be done a certain way. I mean, I came up with if a person has knife around your, you know, and they're holding you from behind. Okay. And at that point, I said, tell my students, there are two things you have to do with this. Okay. Because you've got to get this knife away from your neck, because you do not want to pull away, because that's a very weak thing to do. Because if you pull away and the guy's strong enough, he'll come back and you'll get cut. So I said, so one option, you know, I said there are two things you can do, but you've got to get this knife away from your throat before you do anything. One is to grab hold, and you may want to go up here with your other hand, because there's a nerve here, and just dig in. Whether it works or not is irrelevant, but you pull it down against your chest and you hold it against your chest. Okay, don't try and pull away, because that's weak. You hold it against your chest and then do whatever technique you're going to do. The other option, and unfortunately I don't have 3 or 4 arms here, maybe Will can do it with his uke. Let's have you guys stand up. Okay, we're gonna have some fun here. Let's see if we can we get this one to, how do I get this to, Share screen. See, what do I want to do here? Oops. What did I do?
You did screen sharing.
Oh, come on, Kirby. What do you do here? I want to get back to full screen.
You see the little green box at the top, Sensei? It says share screen. You hit that. That's what happened.
Which corner? Oh, come on, Kirby. Hide thumbnail video shows them. We're gonna get this one way or the other. Well, that didn't work too well. It's not too bad. I still can't get what I want. Where are these? How do I get to?
This screen. Oh.
Okay, how do I? Okay, there we are. Okay, there's the participants. New share.
Try right-clicking on Will's picture and clicking on replace pin.
Participants, more. Okay, have to leave it this way. So I can't.
You've got to stop sharing.
Okay. Could you put his? He's going to put his knife around your neck. Okay. Now, your left hand's going to hold onto his wrist. I want your right hand is going to come back behind his elbow. You're not going to grab it. You put it there, but I want you to push his elbow to your left. Hard push, almost a strike. Okay, now from there, okay, again, that's another way to get the knife away from your neck. You've either got to push it across, or you've got to pull it down against your chest. You've got, number one thing is you've got to get it away from your throat, because you only get one of those. Okay, from there, once you've brought this here, now the other thing we need to do here is we need to change your left hand grip. Okay, so we're gonna have you start all over. Knife against throat. Now, what I want you to do, I'll explain it first, and it's easier to do. What I want you to do is take your left hand, okay, and you're going to slide it up under his forearm. I just want you to slide it up under his forearm. Okay.
Here?
Yeah. Okay. Now, what happens is, as you can just slide your hand down so it's just under your chest a little bit, just a little lower. What's going to happen is, as you hit his elbow with your right hand, you're going to slide your hand up under his forearm. Okay. Okay, now you've got to keep this, you bring his elbow down towards you. You're going to be setting up a shoulder lock or a takedown. Okay. Now, from here, you can turn your hand and grab his wrist. You turn your left, there you go. Okay, now, from there, if you want, you do hip throw, whatever you feel you can do, as long, but keep that, you want to keep that knife as close as you can to your chest. Because once you pull it out there, it's easier for it to come back and slice your neck. Getting sliced in the chest is not nice to have happen, but it's not going to be fatal. It's going to be superficial. Okay. And then, or if you can bring his elbow down, and you can actually bring it down to the elbow down to your chest. Okay, you there. Okay, now what you can do is simply bend over a little bit. Bend over. Rare time when I say bend over. You got to hold his wrist though. You got to. You're going to do a shoulder, and you're going to turn into him. Turn into him. Turn into him to your right. There you go. Okay. Now that, to me, that's, I say, an only way to get out. Okay. But I'm sure there are others. Does anybody have any other techniques that only be done one way?
Can you hear us? Can you hear us at all?
Yes.
Okay. So what we typically do is come from the outside and pin to our chest,
Okay.
so it doesn't move at all. And then we'll do one of two things, either the one you just showed, or we came around here in the figure 4, or we'll step out and behind and either stab or go to a hammerlock.
Okay. Oh, did he cut himself?
He does cut himself, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he cut himself. You didn't cut him. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because there are. Seki taught one knife technique, and it was basically a hand throw. But if you execute that hand throw close to your attacker, the attacker inevitably cuts himself. Okay. And this is something you really have to explain to your students, that there are times when you will do techniques and your attacker will end up getting cut with his own weapon. And you want to make, and that can happen. And it's not your fault, because the weapon is in whose hand?
The attackers.
The attacker. Now, which brings up another thing. If you ever have to take a weapon away from a person, okay, let's assume this is the blade. Let's see if I got a knife. Just a second. Okay. Now you got a blade.
Sensei, can you try to fix your screen again real quick? If you could just find that share screen option, that's what you hit, and we could see your desktop versus everyone else.
All I'm saying is screen.
It'll say share screen.
Probably at the bottom.
And you must have accidentally hit that.
I hit the share thing again. You are screen sharing.
There should be an option to cancel.
Somewhere there,
Just try to
stop sharing.
Stop sharing.
There you go.
My God.
Beautiful.
You get a promotion to 11th gone, Darren. Okay. Anyway, if you have to pick up a knife, okay, or take a knife from a person, do not grab it by the hilt, okay? And because now your prints are all over this weapon, okay, which is not good for you. If the guy was accidentally cut, because he can say, you cut him and your prints are on the weapon, unless there are witnesses. So if you grab the knife, I usually recommend grabbing it by 2 fingers right at the hilt. And that's it, because you can secure a weapon this way. Okay. And no one can, you can't attack a person. Well, if you have a really sharp blade and you're really good, you could probably cut a person this way. But odds are this is not the manner in which you can effectively attack a person with a knife by just with 2 fingers. So, you know, these are stupid little CYAs, but these are things you pick up from law enforcement people or attorneys. Okay.
So you think we can safely say then that there do not exist any techniques that can be executed only one way?
I think there are. I just can't find them. I know Seki used to have a couple that were, you know, there were only one way to do it. I just can't. I mean, probably if I went through all the techniques that are in the big book, I'd probably find 1 or 2. But there's so many variations. It's just.
Maybe the alternative way just hasn't been created yet.
That's right.
I like your optimism. That's good.
Okay.
Probably an issue of semantics, right? Because there's a lot of variations for every technique, but then you have to have the argument, is it a variation of the technique or is it a new technique?
Right.
Valid point.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and a variation, you know, the new technique is where the whole move concept is different. And I don't know. Okay, let's hit up on is there anything else we want to do with this one here yet? On choosing submissions or use of force continuum?
On the force continuum / submissions, if I could ask just one follow on.
Yeah.
I appreciated the extended discussion as it applied to law enforcement. I might have 2 or 3 out of 10 students that are law enforcement. And so what I often find is a student says, if it's a self-defense application specifically, what is it that I need to know for sure to defend myself with this technique? And defending myself is always translated as get away, hold.
Right.
And so back to my original statement, that I think is where I have either evolved or devolved, depending on how you look at it, to a real firm striking finish and move rather than risking tying up. And I've had law enforcement officials say that would be justifiable if the person said, I really did feel like I was in danger, and they ended up doing a strong palm heel that broke a cheekbone and caused major issues, they're justified. So that's kind of the genesis of that question in my mind.
It's different state laws are different, as we all know from the past election. And I can really only address California for the most part, and it basically, in California, you can basically do whatever is necessary to protect yourself from further injury and remove yourself from the situation. Anything beyond that is excessive force. So if you have to do it, you know, I don't have my students, you know, I say it. The only strikes I really teach my students, as far as the head are concerned, are palm strikes. And that's either to the nose or the cheekbone. They're both serious enough injuries in terms of physical pain, psychological damage. You can't see where the injury is. You just know you're bleeding a lot. And that's the value. They may or may not be debilitating. But you cannot keep punching away at this person who's down. You can't keep kicking at them. You can't, there's a video a few weeks on the news of a LAPD officer who I watched that and I said, he's in trouble. because one officer had a suspect up against the wall and the other officer came in, just started punching him right and left, roundhouse punches to the guy's back. And I said, what is he doing? Okay, again, I didn't know the full situation, but if you had a person who had been quote unquote submitted or they're down on the ground and you just keep punching away at them, you are now the aggressor, you know? And there are probably some states or localities where they say, well, if someone attacks you and you beat the pulp out of him, that's what he gets. And nothing would happen. But there are other states where you cannot do that. You have to use that's where the term, what's called reasonable force. And the police are stuck under that as well. And martial artists are stuck under that because we're supposed to have more control. It's a fine line.
Just as a last comment, Professor, especially in the months of just talking in these groups,
Yeah.
I have really rethought the process of being willing to certify instructors. I'm not saying I wouldn't, but I would never do it as willingly as I have in the past. And that's not a statement on the student's ability. I'm really concerned more than ever about liability matters when I'm certifying. And I hadn't thought of that until these groups.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why I say I don't certify. I mean, there are two things here. One, if you're a black belt, you're a sensei. So to some extent, it doesn't matter what you say or do. That person could theoretically go out and teach. Well, anybody can go out and teach in the US. You make yourself up a certificate. You say you're a 27th degree black belt in tic-tac-toe, and you go out and, you know, technology is wonderful, but it can be abused. I have always relied on AJA certification, and I think the advantage is that if you follow an organization's criteria, you're safer because now you're following the use of force continuum, so to speak. You're following policy, and most organizations that are reputable have fairly common standards. I don't know whether, and this is again something where you would probably have to consult an attorney. I don't know whether you would be responsible if one of your students who became a teacher taught something to another student and they ended up being sued, which turned around and sued their instructor, and he in turn sued you for teaching. That is why we have in our dojo release, there's what's called a third party waiver, where the person who signs our participant agreement assumes all liability for anything they do, and they not only free, but they indemnify the instructor and everyone else from any lawsuit or legal costs or stuff like that. So it may be a matter of changing your participant agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad to have to do that, but we're a very litigious society at times. But I would think personally, if you promote a person in good faith and you decide they would be a good instructor in good faith, that nobody can really come back at you. And if, you know, I mean, they're, how do you say, I usually weed out bad students within a couple months. And there have been about 3 or 4 students where they've come in, they wanted to be in the class, and I would not let them sign a release. And I said, sorry, you can't. They're just attitude just was not there. And I don't know if Janet, were you with us when we were at we were still at the park that nobody could find. up on the hill, and one guy came in. This is his first night. He crossed off about a fourth of the stuff on the release, and I also noticed because he had put his jacket down, I went, why is his leather jacket so heavy? And I picked it up, I felt something, and it turned out to be a roll of quarters in one of his pockets. And right there, I made the decision, he's not going to be in the class. And he says, he signed the release. And I said, I can't accept this. You have to file, you have to accept the whole release, or you can't be in the class. He says, well, I don't want those in there. I said, well, you go back to the city, ask for a refund, they'll give you a refund. And ultimately that's what he did. I was about this close to calling the sheriff's department because of roll of quarters he had in his jacket. But I didn't think there'd be really any legal grounds for that. You know, had it been a gun or something else, you know, more dangerous, I probably would have just cover my butt. Yeah, but it's hard. I mean, but usually we weed people out fairly well by the time they get to be a black belt. And that's what. Yes, Jan, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. Number one, we are increasingly in an era where disagreeing with somebody's social opinions is considered an assault. So this is going to be a moving target. You know, what is considered an assault is not totally a historical phenomenon. Also, I wanted to ask TJ what state he lived in and when he heard these remarks from the law enforcement people he was teaching.
I'm in Illinois. And Illinois is neatly divided into Southern and Chicago. I'm in Southern Illinois. This is all within the last 18 to 24 months. One of my students is a major with the state police here, and he's the head of SWAT. And these were from him in particular. It was an amazing time having him when Dojo was meeting, because he's just a world of knowledge on this. So, but it's pretty recent.
Okay.
But certainly prior to what has happened in terms of the last 6 to 8 months.
I was just very interested in knowing if this was in prior years, because certainly it was something that I think we all would have heard of 10 years ago. But now, as I said, when people are being accused of assault for microaggressions and verbal encounters, at least I'm in California, and these things are really extending what is considered to be a personal vulnerability. I also wanted to mention to Sensei, you said the only strikes you teach to the head are palm strikes. You also teach elbow and forearm.
With hit? Oh no, I was talking strikes. I get, depending on your position, if you're standing, I can see a strike with the elbow or forearm to the face. I mean, and as I said in class, the best thing to hit a person with is your elbow anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, that'll do more damage than anything.
I would have opted for a stick, but elbow will do.
Yeah. But we were in reference to the person being down already and his face is available.
Yeah.
It's easy it's easier to come in with a strike with this way than trying to, So yeah, and I mean, there'll even be times where I've shown, a person's down and you do a knee drop into their side. I mean, the situation dictates what you do. If you have more than one aggressor, you don't want this first person that you've taken down getting up, and you have to do something fast. And a knee drop is going to be a lot faster than a couple hits. But situation dictates. Okay, we have, okay, we got, any other comments right now, or? Okay, I forgot who gave us this one on the importance of Randori or sparring in real time with resistance. Who
That was me, Sensei.
is?
Christian.
Oh, Christian. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just curious. So I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 20 years, been teaching for the past 5. I have a home dojo. And for me, what makes judo, guys that practice judo, judokas, wrestlers, and guys that practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the amount of real-time sparring they do, right? Over the course of my 20 years, I've literally done thousands and thousands of hours of practicing the techniques that I learn against someone who is resisting. And I think that helps you get really, really good. Now, I started years ago, I started in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, and I did that for 3 years and ended up switching to BJJ because I just wanted to do more groundwork. And I've been wanting to come back to Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. I love it. I have a tremendous amount of respect for it, and I want to learn it. But I visited some schools recently, and none of them do any type of Randori or sparring at all. They only do the techniques. And my question is how effective do you think you can really get if you're just constantly practicing with a compliant partner? That would be my question. And I mean no disrespect at all, because I love Japanese Jiu-Jitsu.
Okay. Okay. When I first started way back in the 1st century, Seki used to have us do Randori.
Mhm.
We used to have Randori competition. Injury rate was high.
Mhm.
And that was back in the 60s and early 70s. And the general attitude was, if you get hurt in a martial arts class, that's your own fault for being so stupid to be in a martial arts class.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the way it was, And at some point, places started requiring insurance.
Mhm.
And that I think that has changed the entire parameter. When I first when I was at Burbank Parks, and they decided one year that we required insurance, I went to a 3 companies, and they wanted, jiu-jitsu, you've got to wear, they wanted us wearing all the protective gear that karate people wear.
Mhm.
And I finally found an agent. I said, look, if we wear all that stuff, we're going to have more injuries, because jiu-jitsu isn't just hitting and kicking. We have to be able to feel the person's body to know what techniques are working and what techniques we can do and how to control them. And so this guy said, okay, we'll try you for 1 year. And we stuck with them for a couple of decades. In fact, it was the same company that encouraged us to become a nonprofit corporation because it would lower our insurance by 2/3, which it did. And then the year after we did that, the company moved offshore. And at that point I said, it's not financially intelligent to deal with an offshore insurance company. So we switched to another company, because once you're offshore, if they don't want to pay your claim, what are you going to do? You're stuck. And we had very few. I've had very few claims over the years. Nothing for liability. I think we've had maybe, I'd say, in 53 years, maybe 3 or 4 insurance claims for injuries. But I think that's part of it. Is you can't do it because the insurance, you can't get the insurance. Because once you get more than 1 or 2 injuries a year, you get dropped.
Mm. I wonder then how do all the judo schools and all the other schools where the guys are actually
they can do it. They can do it because I think judo has stricter rules than jiu-jitsu. Because jiu-jitsu includes karate and aikido, which is a lot of joint locking and things of that sort.
Mhm.
And this is just my opinion.
Mhm.
To that extent, it's a safer sport. There are certain techniques they do, and they have to do them in certain ways. Again, it goes back to use of force continuum, and law enforcement officers can only do certain things. Judo people, if they're following the judo rules, can only do certain things. Jiu-jitsu people, on the other hand, if a person's resisting a throw and I want to knee him in the groin,
Right.
and he's not wearing a cup, but even if he's wearing a cup, it's going to have an effect upon him. If I knee him in the chest, I don't think a judo person is going to do a wrist press for the submission.
Mhm.
But that could easily become a fracture. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the injury risk is greater in jiu-jitsu than it. I mean, yes, there's an injury risk in judo. If the person doesn't know how to fall, they get thrown too hard, they do something really stupid, they do something stupid.
Yeah.
People in jiu-jitsu get hurt when they do something stupid too. I mean, I've been there. And Seki told us two things consistently. He said, once you know a hold is set, tap out. Because if you don't tap out, you're going to get hurt. And then we'd go into Randori competitions, and he'd get ticked off at me for tapping out when a hold was set. Now, I never got an injury in competition. I got my injuries in practice, but he would get upset with me. And I said, well, Sensei, you told us if it's set properly. I said, I don't want to get hurt in competition, because then I can't continue on, and I might, I got a couple of second places. I never got first, but I was able to walk away. And I think that's, the risk of injury is higher. And so I think once insurance companies came in, that kind of slowed things down. I think you're right in saying there are some stuff, and I've seen them, there are some systems, and I probably told you in emails, where they do beautiful kata. They do what's called kimono kata competition, where both Tori and Uke know the whole routine. They practice it 5,000 times prenatally as well, and they've got it down perfect, and they look beautiful.
Right.
But they couldn't fight their way out of a wet paper bag.
Right.
Okay. There are other ryu that have gone the route of, and also those same ryu probably do not teach self-defense until after a person is black belt, which means you only learn technique below black belt, and you don't have to deal with street attacks until after you're black belt. Because somewhere in the history of things, and I may get in trouble here, someone once said, the only people that get attacked on the street are black belts.
That's ridiculous.
Okay, and we all know that doesn't happen. But anyway, eventually some of them are good at street self-defense. The other side of the coin is that there are some systems that teach jiu-jitsu for street attacks from the very outset, from the first night. I mean, that's the way my sensei taught, Seki taught.
Yeah. Because
you have to be able to deal with a street attack. I can also say I've had a few students, several students that have been attacked on the street. It's been over in 5 to 7 seconds. Their attacker has been down. Surprisingly, most cases they used a judo throw. The taito, a wonderful technique on the street. And they haven't gotten injured. I had one girl who had a knife pulled on her in a bus stop after school. She was a black belt. It was a stupid attack for the guy to do. And she was in high school. She broke his wrist. He ran away. Okay, so we're back to We're back to Darren with, even with a broken wrist, you're still not helpless. The next day she came to the junior high where I was at, which was across the street from the high school. She was afraid to go to school because she thought she was going to be arrested for breaking the guy's wrist. And I asked what happened. I said, no. I said, so we went to the school police on campus. They walked over to, they didn't really walk her over to the high school. They went over to the high school, arrested the kid with the blue cast for attempted assault with a deadly weapon. Okay. Which, she was, what every student who has used it has been surprised at. They have been surprised that it works.
Mhm.
And they've been surprised at the amount of damage they did. That was really, and it was upsetting to some of the kids, the damage they did to their attacker.
Sensei, could I share a quick story that relates back to what you were saying about the kata?
All I'm trying to say is that it depends. I think training with some resistance is good, and you can do that with upper belts.
Mhm.
But I think, like I said, jiu-jitsu today is not the jiu-jitsu of 50 years ago
Mhm.
because of the living as society.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
When I turned 50, I started training Aikido. I did that for a year and a half, and I loved it a lot. There were some students in the class who began to question some of the techniques, and Ushiba's platform was zero competition in Aikido. It was all for mutual benefit. It's a wonderful thing. Well, there were about 5 masters or black belts that ran this particular school, and one of them was younger. And when the older guys weren't there, one class, he said, all right, let's play around a little bit for real. No more just dancing. I'm going to do these techniques and you're going to not let me do them. Okay. And this is not to toot my horn because I'm average in every respect. I had only been doing it at that point for less than a year. And it was like some of those people knew nothing. What I had done in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for all those years, I was able to literally toy with them, literally. And I am average in every respect. And I ultimately left the school. And my thinking is how can you pull these moves off, these really, really fancy moves, when you got someone who doesn't want to let you? And that's when I started thinking there's got to be some type of resistance training so you can get those techniques that are battle tested. You can whittle out the ones that are high percentage and keep the ones that work. This is where my head is at in terms of Japanese jiu-jitsu.
Right.
How can we ensure that? Yes, I think
Darren.
Yeah, Christian, I'd like to expand on that a little bit. I agree with you 100%. I think that the necessity for Randori or realistic attacks in that purpose is certainly a requirement. We do all the time train in Randori, realistic, real life attacks. To expand on what Sensei Kirby was saying, there's a necessity for the understanding of the level of the individuals that you're working with. So what I mean by is I work with high level jiu-jitsu practitioners and their understanding of what is required to be able to perform certain techniques and what they need to do to escape. Now, understanding at the same moment that there's a gray area of give take, meaning that if they're attacking me in a certain way, a certain format, or with a certain attack, and I respond to that attack, if I go 100%, they're likely going to be injured or hurt. So they have to understand that if I'm demonstrating a technique or responding to an attack that they're giving me, that in order for me to be able to perform the technique without hurting them, if I'm countering with a strike, that kind of loosens their grip or allows me to perform or move into the next transition of the technique, or if they need to fall out of a technique, then they understand that what it takes to be able to prevent injury. On the lower experienced people, then you can't do that with them. So you have to be able to use those experience levels to be able to how you're going to perform. And that's also not all as aggressiveness, but in speed and performing a technique, and then you can grow from there. And then also in the same regard for comparing the Japanese aspect versus the Brazilian side, and when you're looking at, okay, I'm going to only be able to do ground techniques, and you can have that, you can expose the BJJ side as well. Well, like, for example, the altercation or the fight doesn't start on the ground, and as a Japanese jiu-jitsu practitioner, the last place you want to be is on the ground. So for that individual in BJJ, then they're completely exposed not only to, you know, having to get to the floor to be able to do what their experience level is greater in, to be able to defend themselves, but also be able to defend themselves before they even get there, and all of the factors that are included to be able to say, okay, I need to defend myself on the floor. Well, as a Japanese jiu-jitsu practitioner, there's so many other things before getting to that spot that they're able to do.
Yeah.
So it works on both sides. I agree 100%. You need to be able to work in those scenarios, whatever it might be, from standing. And then, you know, when you get to the BJJ side, there's a lot of sport aspect involved in it as well. And yeah, you do get better when you work on those things with someone who understands what flow you're going with in a BJJ aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also a sport as well, which is limiting the Japanese jiu-jitsu guy from doing whatever they want to in that regard.
Yeah.
So we do practice those things on, you know, we've been fortunate as far as injuries are concerned. There are injuries at times, but we've been pretty fortunate in understanding the experience level of the practitioners that we're working with, and at what level they can understand to be able to move at different speeds and different aggressiveness in working with Randori. But yeah, that's something that we work with all the time.
Thank you for that, Darren. And I actually totally agree with you. As long as I've done it, the last place I actually want to be in a real street fight is on the ground too. That's the honest truth. I do not want to be on the ground in a life or death street fight. So I completely agree with what you said, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah. What I will do with students sometimes is I will put them in a situation where their opponent is intentionally resisting, and then I'll say, okay, what are you going to do? And it may take them a while to come up with something, but eventually they usually do. Or, you know, after a minute or two, I'll make a suggestion. But I think you have to put students. There are ways to put students, because we're in a park program. So there's some other issue there. And by the way, Dave, I love your T-shirt. There are ways to put students into situations where they have to figure out how to get out of something that they thought was going to work that isn't working. And that segues into what Darren said. It's at your lower ranks, they kind of have to learn the basics, and they have to get the feel for the art before they can move on to, you know, okay, when do I take the call? How do I best protect myself in this technique? You know, and all these other factors that come in that a newer student doesn't think of because they don't have the skill level. Seki, I mean, the only thing Seki wouldn't allow us to do with Randori was attach to the face. Everything else was fair game. And if most of us from, he'd only allow brown belts enough to do Randori. And we had the shin padding, the forearm padding, back of the hand foam padding. Occasionally he'd walk around in class. Everybody in his class wore a cup, because on occasion he'd walk around with a stick and have everybody line up and do a love tap. And you can't do that today. You'll get fired, you'll get arrested. Who knows what happens in California? But there are some things, you know, when I taught in junior high, I could do a lot more with those kids than I can with the park department. And you kind of have to work your program around what your students are capable of. And the other side of the coin is what they're willing to do, because you know, it's great to have a dojo, but if you don't have any students, what are you doing? I mean, you know, there are, you know, there are trade-offs. I've watched a couple of Darren's classes, and they're a pleasure to watch because they take me back about 40, 50 years. And you know, I like to see the Randori, but there's a lot, as Darren said, there's a lot of good judgment involved, and it's a skill that will actually help students on the street, because on the street you have to use good judgment.
Sensei,
Yes.
our classes last 2 hours, and the last 20 minutes of the majority of our classes involve Randori with resistance. I explain to them each time I review and remind them that this is the most dangerous part of anything we do in our classes. I've explained to them on a number of occasions that statistically the most injury-prone activity is football, and wrestling is number 2 on that list. And what we're doing is a form of wrestling. But when you say in the dojo that you have a sparring or Randori in real time with resistance, the fact that you cannot have full force strikes means it's not realistically, it's not street realistic. But you can have strikes that are less than full force, and we have those in our Randori, and we have injuries, but they're like Darren, we've been fortunate, they've been minor.
Right.
But having that is the most real our classes get, is that last 20 minutes of Randori. Not every class, but the vast majority of classes have it. And it's probably definitely the most intense, and it's definitely the most interesting parts of classes for most people. Line the mats with people. We have 2 at a time, usually, sometimes it's 2-on-1. And we even do it with the lower belts that want to participate, and it's been successful. But the fact is that it's still not street real, because full force strikes buy you time that you don't get with a half force or quarter force strike.
Right.
Yeah, and so that's as real as we can make it in the dojo. And you're very right. The further we go in time, it seems the more litigious our society becomes. So I'm aware that it's a liability concern for me. Anytime I see somebody that looks like they've really been injured severely, I suck air. But we've been successful with it, and I feel good about it, and I look forward to going back to that.
Yeah, I think again, as Darren said, you know, in using hits and kicks and knees and some of these other techniques or nerves or whatever you want, good judgment really comes into play in terms of, you know, you realizing I've been hit, I need to react as if I've been hit, to give my training partner the opportunity to finish up the technique. Okay. Because you don't really want people hurt.
Yeah.
I mean,
The only protective equipment that I require is that everybody who participates must at all times be wearing a knee cage that has the metal hinges on both sides of each knee. And they put those on to participate, because injuries are the most prevalent and the most disastrous. And my son Logan actually avoided a severe knee injury because the knee cage protected his knee in one such Randori session.
okay.
Very thankful he had it on. So I would recommend that to anybody, any sensei who does this as a part of their classes. And those are inexpensive, relatively inexpensive. I foot the bill for them, they wear them, and they're always wet by the end of, bring them home and dry them out.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, what we'll do at the end of class, and we'll usually start the second or third week of a session. So this includes even the new ones. We'll line them up with an experienced student, and they'll get random street attacks, and because I try, we call it deer in the headlights training. On the street, your greatest enemy is your delayed reaction to an attack. And it takes, and the students start, I say, I don't care what you do, but do something. Even if it's block a hit, even if it's step back, do something, move your body. And eventually around week 7 or 8, as they start to get techniques down, they start incorporating techniques into whatever the attack is. They do get better. I mean, their only limit is their technical proficiency with their techniques. But their ability to respond to a street attack, to me, is critical. And there are some, like I said earlier, I think it was to Thomas, there are some systems that don't teach street attacks until after a person's black belt. And to me, that's just, it's wrong. Because what are you in a martial arts class for? And so it's, you know, the students are initially very embarrassed at what they cannot do. And you know, the upper belts, we just compliment them all over the place when they do something such as block a hit, or, you know, because it's like encouraging a child to walk. But they do get better. And the ability to respond to an attack is just as to me is more important than whatever techniques you know. Because if you're a black belt and you've got all this technical knowledge, but you don't know when or how to use it, what have you learned? But anyway, I have one more question for you, and this has to do with January more than February. To do a quick segue here. Right now, I've only got we have the January 1st weekend, which is when we would normally have a Zoom session. And I don't know what shape some of you might be in, or where you'll be on was it January 1st or 2nd? One of those 2 days, that's a Saturday. And so, do you want to just have one Zoom meeting in January on the 16th, which would be the 3rd Saturday? Or for that month, do you want to switch it to the 2nd and 4th Saturday and have 2? And if you don't want to answer now, you don't have to. If you want to think about it, just send me an email with your thoughts. You can do that as well.
I'm for 2 on the 2nd and 4th, and I'll email that as well.
Okay. But you know, if you could let me know, because I can do either one. And then February, I have it just the 3rd week. Theoretically, I'm supposed to have right shoulder replacement on January 28th, which I have a sneaking suspicion will be postponed because of other activities in California. Although my surgeon hasn't called me yet and said, would you be willing to postpone your surgery again? And this will be the 3rd time. But you know, I'm functioning, so, you know, and, you know, if they need the room, you know, COVID is more serious than a shoulder replacement. Yes.
Sensei, not to call you out or anything, but isn't your birthday on the 1st as well?
No, my birthday's on March 17th.
It's on March 17th, huh?
Yeah, St. Patty's Day.
Okay.
Which is the same. My father-in-law was also born on March 17th. So you know.
I have a son-in-law that's birthday is on the 17th of March.
We all got to get together and
Yeah.
have an Irish coffee or something like that. Or have some more blarney. Anyway. Anyway, I do wish everyone the happiest of holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. I do wish you a very happy New Year. I think 2020 will be better than, 2021 will be better than 2020 for a variety of reasons. Major, you know, and as we get past COVID, I'm hoping things will return to some sense of normalcy by the end of the year. And we're a resilient country, and we will survive. And I know, you know, I know some of you may have lost some people already. I've lost one very good friend. I forgot his name again. Cliff Stewart. He's a martial artist, big black guy, teddy bear. But you don't mess with him. And one of my jiu-jitsu students who was in his early 20s passed away a couple weeks ago. So it's you know, I know some of us have you know, lost people, and it does leave a hole in the heart. But anyway, so I do wish you the best. I hope your families are safe and healthy. Have a small Christmas, because I want you back next year. And don't do anything dangerous on New Year's. Save it for the 4th of July. No. Anyway, okay. I will try and get this out as a video, hopefully by the end of the day today. My doctor finally got me on a medication a week and a half ago. I spent like 40 plus days feeling beat up. It wasn't COVID, although I was thinking it was. I actually got tested, and that came up negative. They had no idea what got to me, some sort of virus or something. So they finally put me on prednisone for 5 days, and that killed it. And so I've been doing yard work for the past 2 days, and I feel fantastic. It's good to get the body moving. So,
Hey, Professor, I wanted to tell you, I really appreciate the Star Wars theme on the videos, by the way.
oh, thank you.
That's nice. That's enjoyable. Yeah.
If any of you have a title for today, you know, a 1 or 2 word title that you'd like to come up with, and maybe give me some sort of a theme to work, you know, I'll you know, I know the titles and themes are, for lack of a better phrase, stupid, but how do you say? I don't think you can't be serious with everything. And how do you say? Sugar draws more flies or more ants than vinegar.
How about how hard can I hit them?
It's got to have fewer words. I'll write it down though. Okay.
You catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. That's the phrase.
How hard can I hit you? Okay, that's all right. I never used how hard can I hit you? That sounds.
Sensei, I want to thank you for taking the time to do these classes, and I want to thank the regular participants. I take notes, and I have gained so much from you other sensei, and I thank you so much for your shared knowledge. I appreciate it.
It's been a great
yeah,
way to
yeah.
start this. Thank you.
I really want to thank you too, because I learn a lot. I get some insights, and as one of the participants said, it keeps us connected, and that's important. And what I'm hopeful for is even after the this COVID thing is over, that we'll continue this, and we'll see how it goes. And
Very good.
Christian, thank you for joining us this time, and hopefully you'll be back next time. No audio.
I said, thank you very much for having me. It was an honor, and I will definitely be back.
Oh, good. And as I said before, because I've had some email inquiries, and they said, is it limited only to Budoshin Jujitsu Sensei? And my one-word response was no, because I think it's the willingness. It's number one, it's the professionalism that's on this Zoom workshops that I think is fantastic. And secondly, we're exchanging ideas. We learn from each other, and I think that's what the martial arts should be about. And it's as close as I can get to the summer camps. Let's see, Dave, you've been to one or two of the summer camps. Darren, were you ever at any of the summer camps?
Not yet, Sensei. Unfortunately, I haven't. I've
Right.
been to plenty of other classes, but not unfortunately the summer camp yet.
And before that, it was Camp Budoshin, which was even more insane. But it's nice getting different martial artists together because you learn from each other. I want to thank you all for that. So I think we'll all bid adieu, and Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah and Happy Kwanzaa and Happy New Year. And I don't know what else is coming up, but we will see you either. Let me know if you want to get together just on the 16th, or if you want to get together on the 9th and 23rd instead. Okay, so have a good weekend.
Take care, everyone.
Merry Christmas.
Bye-bye.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
have